Well, hello everyone. Nice to meet you. I'm Yves Messi, and I'm currently head of engineering for a platform called CUDOS Ventures. We are essentially building a decentralized equivalent of Amazon Web Services or Google Cloud running entirely on blockchain. So today we'll be speaking about the topic of re-architecting blockchain for inclusion. And with that, I think it's best to really start with, first of all, what is blockchain? Who am I? How do I come into this space? And then how, from what I've seen and what I've experienced, how we can essentially re-architect this industry to include more Black voices in the leadership spots, both from a technical and commercial perspective. So everyone here, I hope, unless you've been living under a rock, has heard about Bitcoin. And obviously, Bitcoin is such a big deal because it's a piece of code that constitutes an entire financial and notarial system. And what that means is that essentially some engineer called Satoshi Nakamoto about 18 years ago now, came up with a way to have an algorithm that maintains a fixed supply of a set currency called Bitcoin, 21 million of them for the rest of time, and to essentially game the interaction of people wanting to come onto the system and help verify it using any computing resource they have, from a cell phone to their laptop to a data center to an entire country. People are going to an enormous scale to contribute to the verification of the Bitcoin ledger. And this process that facilitates the witnessing of Bitcoin's computation every second of every day amounts to this ledger of verified witnessed computation every second that we call blockchain. So blockchain is really a witness technology, and it's transformational because most of the history of commerce the past 100 years had to do with how to create an organization that had a hierarchy where frontline staff would get information, middle line staff would authorize any kind of transaction based on the levels of expertise, and the highest levels of any corporation would use their experience to essentially facilitate the flow of commerce based on the highest level of decision-making authority. So with the rise of technologies like artificial intelligence, which are autonomous, and now blockchains, which are equally autonomous using algorithms, you end up having a self-managing financial system that doesn't require any human intervention and is arguably more secure and more accountable and more transparent than the supply of gold in the world today. So that's the reason why people call Bitcoin digital gold. Now, we're talking about blockchain here, and the reason why there's a separation between Bitcoin and blockchain is because people have realized that, yes, you can now have this world currency, this digital gold that anyone in the world with an internet connection can buy. But also, this technology now behind Bitcoin is enabling all sorts of business processes from happening. You can issue identity cards for refugees on the Bitcoin network, and anyone will essentially be able to see that they've only been issued once, and it's almost for free, or at least the cost of transaction on the Bitcoin network solves the issue of people having fake identity documents and any official documents like that. Other institutions, such as the one that I've worked with during my time at R3, like stock exchanges, like banks, like insurance companies, are rethinking their value chains and business models to run along the lines of blockchain using smart contracts, which are essentially computer programs that run the same way every time. You can have an insurance policy smart contract, you can have a bond smart contract, you can have a gaming app smart contract. It will run the exact same time every time around the world in a self-policing way, once they're deployed. So generally speaking, with blockchain technology, businesses are deciding, what can we get away with not doing anymore? How can we simplify our trading desk? If you're a stock exchange, can I now issue a stock on top of a blockchain like Bitcoin or Ethereum, which facilitate these kind of transactions today? So the relevance of this technology to our conversation today about inclusion is that this is the future of financial services. It's the future of law in many ways, and it's the future of insurance as an industry as well. So these industries are now looking at cutting edge technology like AI and blockchain. And the one fact that really stands out is that there is very little representation of either women or ethnic minorities at the top of most blockchain organizations. Why is that? Is there a nefarious reason why this was the case initially? No, not really. It's because Bitcoin was a disruptive technology that was invented by mainly people in their garage who were hacking, who were fairly against the financial system, who felt like you needed a more transparent way of operating a financial system. You needed a more decentralized way of running global financial infrastructure that did not prevent anybody from participating. And this cultural movement called cyberpunk really came from, California, essentially in the US. And some of the cyberpunks, or, anyone who used the command line interface, the black screen with the green letter that flash, anyone that was using that between the 1980s and 1990s was probably involved in creating what we call Bitcoin and blockchain technology today. So that's not very representative. The same thing applies to AI, right? Where AI is such an advanced computer science context and concept that you would really need to look for it initially in order to even know how it works, let alone how it impacts your individual life. So where I come in when it comes to this is I studied politics at university. And yes, I finished high school the first time when I was 11 to 12 years old. I was supposed to study engineering. But where I come from initially in Africa had a lot of political risk essentially happening and political uncertainty. So my engineering disposed minds decided to essentially data mine political election data sets around the world for about 4 to 5 years and try to see if I could start predicting them. And I ended up building an artificial intelligence system that predicted election results ahead of time and predicted the probability of political risk or any political conflict in many countries around the world. And I was lucky enough to meet and attend a lecture by someone called Vitalik Buterin, who created the Ethereum blockchain. And what he spoke about was not code, was not algorithm. It was really about the possibility of a financial system that did not exclude anyone, that anyone around the world with an internet connection and a bit of an IQ could essentially fend for themselves financially as long as they were able to actually design some basic smart contracts and earn a living by maybe improving the code for some other people or building financial systems on top of them. So I come into the blockchain space from a view of financial inclusion. And you might see a video about me on YouTube at the London Blockchain Week last year, where I explain how I wanted to make sure that I can help with financial inclusion in blockchain technology since about 5-7 years ago. And that's a struggle that's still ongoing. And my job at R3 has been extensively informative because I've been able to work with top corporations such as NASDAQ, the London Stock Exchange, many of the world's top banks and insurance companies to see how they're applying this technology. And what I can tell you today is that blockchain technology is the future of financial services. It is the future of insurance. Hell, it's the future of issuing currency. So your financial system is about to move into something called digital currencies. If you're in China, you've heard about something called WeChat, WePay. If you use Apple Pay, a Google Pay wallet, you know what digital means to your payment life. So if you really want a future in financial services and insurance, it's a strong technology to at least understand. You don't have to be Satoshi Nakamoto yourself, but as a minority, you need to make sure that you understand what this technology does for you. Because one thing that I've seen, and if you've read the book called Surveillance Capitalism, it's a recent one that came out about 1.5 years ago, on what the big tech monopolies are doing with algorithms in AI and what it means for ethnic minorities and policing policy. It's high time that we get involved to shape exactly how these digital currencies are circulated, to shape the way banking is redefined with us in mind as minorities, as customers eventually for these products once they're rolled out. It's high time for us to understand what blockchain means for the future of investment banking, of commercial banking, of lending, of any buy now, pay later fintech app, of any financial inclusion initiative, right? This is a technology that's well worth knowing about. And getting now finally, with a bit of a roundabout way of doing so, on how can we shape this industry to make it more inclusive? I think I would look at my own story as a guide for how we can do that. And I have to say that I'm incredibly thankful for my parents for making sure that I essentially looked at my future career without any of the ceilings that society kind of taught and teaches many minorities today that they should have, right? If you're African American or if you're Black, you shouldn't code. It's not really cool. You should do basketball instead. If you're Black, you shouldn't be nerdy. You shouldn't be geeky. It's a bit wrong. It's these cultural elements start very early on in high school, in middle school, and many children with high aptitude are discouraged, excluded, and filtered out from STEM professions because it's just not stereotypically accurate, fitting to the stereotype, essentially, for them to be academically inclined or to be nerdy or to like numbers or to like to play with code, essentially. So at the first level of education, high school and middle school, we need to make sure we don't lose out potential Black engineers and substantial future makers in technology space by having teachers encourage at the earliest occasion, anytime they detect any kind of interest. Now, not everyone knows that they have an interest in technology. And frankly speaking, many minorities, such as obviously the Black community anywhere in the G8, may even lack access to basic things like the internet, like cell phones, like a decent laptop. This is something that I know that I've experienced myself as a middle school student back in sub-Saharan Africa before I became Canadian. But I know that many people in the US, Canada, the UK, everywhere else have the same financial struggles that don't expose them to the culture of what makes these technologies very cool to interact with and potentially great future careers to engage in. So high schools and middle schools from an early age need to encourage Black talent if they show any kind of interest in numeracy. Could even be math, could be numbers. But also, and I'm going to be a little bit controversial here, we should make sure that we offer the option to a lot more people who are ethnic minorities, especially Black individuals in high school and middle school, so that at least they're exposed to what it is. When I was in grade 7, grade 6, I didn't necessarily love math. I was really good at it, but I didn't love it. It's only when I became a university student that I realized that math was a beautiful way to help have predictable outcomes in finance, insurance, and cryptographic systems. So many of our minorities, many of our Black students, let's be blunt here, are discouraged from numeracy very early on. And we almost need to make sure that they're exposed to it several times, and many times maybe against their will initially. I know my parents made sure that I exposed to math, whether or not I was a big fan of it. And that gives them at least the option in the future to decide whether or not they want to be involved in the computer sciences, with the algorithms, and with these sophisticated digital new careers that we're now creating in the tech industry. So let's prevent people being filtered out early on at the high school level. Let's expose more students at the high school, middle school level to numeracy classes and any programming classes as soon as possible on a mandatory basis, so that at least they have the option to have a basic understanding of code and math, and to decide to go away from it on their own volition after that, but at least with the option. Many of us don't get the option. So at the next stage, I have to look at the university experience. Now, many university programs in computer sciences, mathematics, anything that's highly numerate, require fairly high level of academic achievement, if not a degree, in the computer sciences specifically, in order to find a job in the industry, at least if you're working with any enterprise client today. But what I'm seeing in my exposure of the technology industry is that you don't need to have gone to university and got a full PhD in computer science before you get to have a say on how Uber works. It's just not how it works anymore. In fact, many people with the ability to understand basic code essentially teach themselves over 3 to 4 months and end up having full and very enjoyable careers in the technology industry, and sometimes with salaries going up into the 6 figures in any currency you can think of. So technology is actually a surprisingly inclusive, or at least accessible, technology career field compared to some of the alternatives that we're faced with, like the law profession, or the engineering profession itself, or investment banking, or any licensed and chartered profession that you can think of. So the technology industry is fast eclipsing many of the traditional routes of achievement. And I think it's an opportunity for many of us after high school to essentially decide, do we care about this digital impact that's happening to us? And how can we get involved to it? How can we make sure we give this option to many people at university level? And how can we expose more ethnic minorities, including Black professionals, to these retraining opportunities? These 6 months programs, these 3 months programs, these self-paced programs early on in their university careers, so that they have the option to at least understand how this digital set of careers, what that means for them, and whether or not they want to get involved. So I just spoke about the high school level and the primary school level, where many of us don't think we're even capable of. But if we're made to understand what code is through mandatory curriculum, and also identified and encouraged by teachers early on, who at least have a mind to think about this space. And when we get to university, instead of having to focus on taking a STEM degree necessarily, which is incredibly useful, no one will ever question that, there is that option always to take a self-paced course or 3 months course or even an internship to expose yourself to the industry to see what it's about. So that's one way that you could actually have a more inclusive way, a more inclusive path for minorities, Black minorities specifically in the tech industry. Now, we're going along a path here. Where are we in this episode? generally speaking, at university, I've seen some self-pacing Udemy course. I may have done an internship, even for free online, for some startup in my community, doing something interesting. I may even start thinking, being an ethnic minority, of ways to improve my community's life, living, standard of living, using this technology that I'm finding out about. What happens next? Well, the career ladder, right? Because when you're done your university degree, you have to get a job. And if you have to get a job, the tech industry, thankfully, now is something that's very cool. I think 10 years ago, if you mentioned you were going to work in technology instead of investment banking, law, or medicine, you looked a little bit crazy. And now working for TikTok as head of content is something that's incredibly prestigious. Most people would agree, actually. So at this university level, things get very interesting. And I think we as Black professionals have to start shifting from necessarily expecting schools, teachers, professors from pushing us. And now we have to start doing a bit of the pulling ourselves. So you have your university education. You may have seen some YouTube videos, online courses on how technology works. How do you get yourself into this space? This counts as well for the blockchain space. Many blockchain technology companies are becoming as large as many of the top fintech companies. A company like Coinbase, if you can look it up, has a valuation of $40 billion today. This is something that's absolutely unforeseen. And many technology companies like Kraken, a major crypto exchange based here in London, has a valuation also in the $40 billion range. So many blockchain companies are becoming established fintech elements of the fintech industry. So the key question is, how can you pull yourself? How can you direct yourself? How can you make your luck happen for you as a Black professional in this technology space that's not necessarily built for you? It's built with people necessarily, in garages in Silicon Valley in mind initially. That's changing, but you need to do something about it yourself. How do you do that? You meet more people in these industries. You seek out meetups. If you go to meetup.com, you'll find out many technology groups. They don't have to be career related. They could be technology focused. Let's say that you learn Python technology in university because you have to take the CFA exam in finance. You can join a Python group in your city, get involved, and see which companies and which startups are recruiting for any kind of talent and how you can get involved. And in fact, you don't even need to know how to code to be involved in technology, right? Because it's not just algorithms, it's customer relations, it's human relations, it's compliance, it's ethics, it's marketing, it's product design, it's user experience design, it's user interface design. Many people in our community feel that you need to be a technology maven, a genius to be in technology, and that's not true. The geniuses need a lot of help from people who understand people in order for the products to actually get to product market fit and actually get the level of scale that successful tech companies achieve. So how to create your own luck at university once you find out that you actually understand digital, that you get digital, you want to get involved in community, get involved in meetups, reach out actively on LinkedIn to professionals in companies who are more than happy to help you. I receive a lot of messages on a daily basis from students in different university programs. Many of them are actually Black professionals who look at my CV or look at my standing and realize, wait, how did he get to where he is? What is he currently up to? And does he have any advice as to how I can get myself up there and do something meaningful myself? And many Black professionals in this space, especially in technology, especially in blockchain, are very, very happy to be able to help any individual who's like that, who reaches out of the blue, especially if you're transparent and you're not trying to sell anything. That's usually the key thing with LinkedIn. So join meetups, take online courses, see if you can find a nonprofit way of using your technology to change your community's standard of living. Reach out to professionals in the space. And once you've done that, if you give it about 3 months or so, usually you will find some kind of placement possible. And at this time, congratulations, you have an offer and you're involved in the technology industry. By this time, you've beaten the odds, being a Black technology professionals, and you're about to find out the different challenges now facing once you're on the inside, right? Because it's not so straightforward. I'll give you an example. I saw someone lecturing on advanced artificial intelligence in Switzerland at a different, I won't name the specific city or the university, but I was lecturing to a room of about 400 PhD and master students in artificial intelligence and cryptography. They mentioned that, I was about to go into the lecture room as the speaker, and the security at the door did not realize that someone looking like me could be teaching 400 different PhDs how to blend advanced cryptography systems with advanced artificial intelligence systems. right? So this is unfortunately, and I don't mean to share this story as a downer, this is unfortunately a reality that you'll face. That if you understand this technology at a high level, because maybe you're high IQ or you've done your research, you've done your homework, you will have to deal with people's perceptions a little bit. You need to accept that unfortunately 9 people out of 10 will be impressed, and I don't want to say shocked, but impressed is a better way of looking at it, that you can actually understand and master what you master. And you have to understand it, you have to educate, you have to be not ruffled by that, you have to grow a bit of a tough skin when it comes to that, and you actually have to help people understand that this is a reality in our globalized world where with the internet and YouTube not discriminating to who clicks the page, everyone can learn about this space and everyone can make a difference in this space. So that's one of the realities you'll learn in this technology space, that people are not very educated about the fact that minorities can be equally, if not more, occasionally, depending on the subject area, expert in this space. You need to be able to not rely on other people's perception of who you are, and you need to be confident in what you know, and that needs to be your business card when you go into this space. So going back into this journey, you're at university, you secured your offer in technology, you're in the space, maybe at an analyst level or associate level, and maybe junior developer level, and you're understanding how it works in practice because you've seen it on TV or in courses, which is great. What's next? How can you navigate a space that you're not necessarily meant to be in by design initially, even if it's changing? The answer is mentorship. You seek mentors. You find people who are also minorities in your space or in other companies if you want to keep it confidential, so that they will tell you how to navigate the complex dynamics of getting promoted, of understanding company culture, of understanding how to brand yourself as a minority, of understanding how to deal with microaggressions in a way that's constructive for you instead of reacting to it, right? And I'll take a break here when it comes to this journey, because I need to inform you that in the technology industry, sadly, Black minorities or Black professionals are more likely to leave the industry than to be promoted today. This is a fact. It's just an industry reality right now. And the reason why this happens is that they face an obstacle with culture. They face an obstacle with the unspoken social capital that comes with being in such a Caucasian-dominated sort of space. So one of the best ways to survive this next wall that you'll face is to understand the culture. There's a great book called The Culture Code. I think it's available on Amazon. I would recommend that you buy it, because it will tell you how strong an influence culture can be. There are many books by Asian American authors and African American authors about the Silicon Valley bro culture, and this is the case, right? It can be a fairly you could argue that it can look like a very sexist industry overall, just because of the male domination of many engineering teams and engineering leadership teams. So if you're a female and Black minority in this technology space, bro culture, the bro code, I think that's the name of the code, is a great book for you to read, but you will have to face this lack of education and double whammy of gender dynamics. And you'll need to be comfortable. You need to expect essentially people to not understand that this is possible, and to educate them, empower them as tolerant beings to work with you on your program. And you need to be aware of the company culture at the company that you join, right? This is a challenge that I had to face several times when dealing with large scale institutional and corporate clients, especially in banking, in central banking and insurance, here in London, for example. You need to understand what the culture is. And many of us have this unfortunate and really disciplined view, but unfortunate, that if you do your homework, if you do the work, if you get an A, you deserve to be there and you deserve to be promoted. In practice, this is not how it works. Unfortunately, the corporate environment and the tech environment is also about perceptions. It's about culture. It's about whether you're seen to understand how these companies work in terms of their social software. And many of us, for example, let's say that it's 5:45 p.m. and you're about to leave, you're about to wrap up the workday, you've done your job, you've met your KPIs, key performance indicators, and you're about to go home, and someone invites you out to dinner randomly with a few others to, relax after work. More often than not, I've seen many fellow sort of Black professionals in this space kind of ignore these opportunities because they see them as being extracurricular, not needed, anything like that. But unfortunately, these are usually opportunities for you to understand what's happening outside of the workplace, what's happening outside of the official on paper life of the company. And these are usually the corridors then that get professionals promoted, because you then understand what the real culture of the company is, what the real issues are in a way that's not spoken about in official meetings. The reason why I mentioned this is that the point of this next obstacle that I'm discussing here is culture. We need to encourage more Black professionals to understand their cultural context. And yes, more companies should make sure that they include Black professionals, right? And on that point, yes, it's great to make sure that you get involved with social meetings and off work time activities. That's essential. But you also need to make sure that you flag any opportunity, at every opportunity, any instance where you notice that maybe you haven't been included in a meeting that had to do with your job description. Because sadly, that's another way that many Black professionals get excluded. And the frustration linked to these kind of instances can lead many to leave the industry and maybe do something where they feel more included, more welcome, and more part of the company culture. So as someone who's faced that and kind of dealt with that constructively, I can let you know that yes, you should always flag any opportunity where you may not be included in a meeting that has your remit. But also, yes, you should put an effort to be involved at almost an informal level and build friendships in your work context, because that's the stuff of promotions, sadly. Promotions are about people who understand the culture and can shape an entire company and have buy-in from all employees who don't always look like them to do the job well. So my advice when it comes to the culture clash is to get included socially and to also flag up any opportunity that you get, instances where your workplace doesn't include you in your work remit. And that will usually be very, very assisted by HR departments, by other professionals. And in fact, you might find out that half of the company or half of your team was essentially against, any instance of you not being included, and it could just have been a mistake. So this culture element is one that discourages many young professionals in the tech industry from going forward because they don't feel included. And I'm hoping that provides a bit of a fix, right? So after that, congratulations. You're now a fairly experienced associate. You might even look to lead a division at some point. How can you make sure that you're included in company leadership? How can you make sure that you can actually make a difference as a Black professional in this space, despite some of the stereotypes and maybe the discrimination? You need to build a profile. You need to prove to a lot of people in your company and in your industry who don't look like you that you're able to work in every context. So if you need to equip yourself with some internal resources, for example, that conversation about not being included in meetings that have to do with your job, you need to grow a tough skin. You need to let people know when you feel like you should be included, but you should also then reach out and go beyond just your remit, just surviving and into thriving. And I don't mean to be blank here, I don't mean to be vague. You actually need to go in the offensive a little bit and expand beyond your original remit and show your leadership capabilities to sometimes executive committees, sometimes board members, sometimes investors in a technology company. And you need to proactively do that yourself. No one is going to shine the light on you and take you to a leadership exam because you happen to be a minority. I hope it's okay for me to say that. You have to go outside of your own comfort zone yourself and demonstrate that you're a potential leader in your company. And once that's done, and you find that maybe it hasn't landed as a message, it's up to you to decide then what happens next to your career. But at least you've given yourself that chance. And the mistake many people make in this space is to expect a proportional amount of the industry to look like any kind of minority proportion at the top magically. But unfortunately, this is business at the end of the day. Technology is a business context. And I think there is a thirst right now for Black professionals who are eager to show their leadership potential and aren't afraid to go through some difficult conversations. And that's precisely what it takes to get included at an executive committee and leadership level for many of the tech companies that you've seen. So you need to prove yourself, and you almost need to, resource yourself internally to deal with some of the issues and hurdles you face as a Black professional, but then you also need to excel more than any other member of your team, regardless of what they look like from an ethnic standpoint. That's one of the key things. Overall, I've described the path from middle school to high school and what it takes to not get filtered out. University, where some people will know how to get into the technology industry and may not have chosen a STEM degree initially, but still get that option while studying in university. And then I demonstrated in the associate and maybe mid-level staff level how you maneuver the difficult corridors of company culture, the difficult politics of inclusion when you're a Black professional in this space, and how you can deal with them best. And then I sort of mentioned how you can go past surviving in the tech industry and thriving as a tech leader in your space, whichever space that you choose, and why it takes a level of self-leadership, self-discipline, resourcing yourself and self-care to make sure that you can deal with any microaggression or obstacles that you face, to make sure you can compete on an equal standing with anyone in this industry and really make your mark in this space. So that's my set of answers to the question of how to re-architect the tech industry, especially blockchain industry and fintech, which is why I'm in, for greater inclusion of Black leadership at an executive level, executive committee level, and at a board level in the next coming years. And I'm hoping we can do more to educate people from day one at high school level to about, reveal maybe whether or not they're geeky. Maybe they get it. And if they don't get it, at least they've done the homework and understand how it works. And then from then on, understanding how it works, they don't have to major in computer engineering. They can go on and study philosophy. I studied political science at university, and I ended up finding myself doing advanced cryptography for a living, right? So this flexibility is very useful. This tooling, we need to give Black minorities the tooling early on to have a choice to get up to speed very quickly. And then at a career level, at the workplace, we need to make sure that we get part of the social hardware, the social software of the company, the informal elements of the company culture, the after work element. You have to essentially make friends, be seen, and you shouldn't expect or sit back passively expecting to be shown or to be pulled up. You have to pull yourself up. No one will do that for you. And if anyone does that for you, you will be hired, but you will not be included, and you will definitely not get promoted, and therefore you will leave. So it takes a level of self-leadership to thrive in this space. And I think this applies to a lot more industries than just technology from what I've seen in my personal experience. And I think that's the best that I can share with you today in terms of how to re-architect the tech industry for inclusion. So just to repeat, early on, educate, expose them to these tools, whether or not they like them. Encourage them and show them role models in this space that have done that, for them to think of futures where they see themselves having an active role in shaping the future of technology. At university, equip them with tools, opportunities to hands-on be exposed to the space and decide whether or not it's for them as students. At a career level after university, equip them with company culture tools. Equip them with how to have difficult conversations about inclusion in an assertive way, despite their being a minority, or actually because of their being a minority, as an asset. After that, equip them to have difficult conversations at the leadership level, where they need to themselves have this difficult conversation with themselves of, not allowing themselves to be passive, including themselves, making themselves seen, showing that they can compete on the marketplace equally, on equal standing to any other group in the industry, regardless of what they look like. And then being an advocate for yourself, essentially, in this space, and deciding what footprint you want to have on the future of your respective end of this technology spectrum, including in blockchain. So I hope this has been useful. We have 20 minutes left for Q&A. I'd be more than happy to answer a few of your questions after this. And if I haven't covered any elements that you meant for me to sort of touch on, feel free to share them in the Q&A. Thank you. Okay, Nantali, yes, very good. I hope that was useful. I was really thinking about this from a practical standpoint, right? We hear a lot of theoretical things on inclusion and all that stuff, but we really need a playbook to maneuver this space on how to get on. What do I do tomorrow about this? And I hope what I was saying was useful about how to get involved. Okay, do you have any recommendations for, oh my God. Okay, well, as you know, I can't make any investment recommendation, but what I can say is that DeFi, decentralized finance, is a very interesting space in the blockchain space. Some people say that it's the future, it's the next Bitcoin. I don't know what it means from a price standpoint, but it's very interesting for people to get involved in. And I'd recommend starting there if you want to be cutting edge. And obviously, buying $1 of any currency and then seeing how it behaves is always a very useful way of getting to know how it works as an asset. Okay, next. how have you managed to protect your soul in these hyper white hostile spaces? Oof. Oh my God. Okay. That's a tricky question. Look, there is something difficult that has to be said. Is that if you're good at math, if you get high grades, if you're lucky enough to be a minority who goes to decent schools, and I've been very lucky with University of Toronto in Canada and Oxford here in the UK, you get this social capital, right? This unfortunate untold tuition that shows you how to maneuver these very hyper white spaces. Right. And that doesn't mean that you get away with a less hostile experience. You still get hostility. But I think these schools, as you've seen in movies, can be very, very tricky to maneuver. And from an early age, it equips you with the hard shell to then survive in these hyper white spaces. And hyper white spaces don't have to be hostile at the end of the day. It's something that also has to be said. Right? It's only hostile if you come at it from a hostility standpoint. And I have to say, I've been guilty of this mindset initially on when I had a strong imposter syndrome, where I assumed everyone was questioning me. I was very suspicious of everything that was going on. But when I realized that half of the room, even if it's white, is actually supportive at the very least at any time, I relaxed a little bit more and I actually sounded people more out. And yes, there are hostile people, but there are also allies in this space, and I focused on that. Now, for self-care practice, I really meditate a lot. During the workspace. And many tech companies have an area of the company where you can go and meditate and take a break from any tension that you might be feeling. Other than that, I think about the impact that I can have with the technology that I'm working on. Right? So I work in payments, I work in financial services, I work in insurance, and now I work in cloud computing, underpinning all of that. I focus on what I can do. I think about developing countries. I think about sub-Saharan Africa. I think about minorities in the UK and in Africa, in the US, who don't have access to the banking services, the suite of banking services that are currently available and made fintech and intelligent now. I think about the impact I can have. And honestly, that is such an inspiration every time that I forget actually any microaggression that I could encounter because I have a bigger job to do. Okay, so what advice do you have around building effective work relationships when working remotely? That is a very, very tricky one, I have to say. And if you're not careful, this is going to really hurt your career progress. So work from home is an inconvenience for inclusion because there is so much unspoken inclusion that happens in meetings, after work drinks or water cooler conversations or briefings in between meetings or signals that you get to read cues about rooms that you never met. So imagine being a minority onboarding into a company without the cultural context that I just mentioned. It's very tricky. The way I deal with that is the minute I join, I hear about, are there any major meetings that happen that I need to be part of? Are there any other meetings you feel that I shouldn't be part of? And can I join some of these as well, just on an individual basis, just to see what the conversation is like? I reach out individually to different members of the team to see who your champions will be as a minority in the company, and then who some of your detractors will also be, right? People who are maybe uncomfortable with people who don't look like them. And I make sure to essentially build a rapport with them to make sure that I can turn them from potential roadblocks into, if it neutral elements of my career strategy at the company in question. So you need to be a lot more proactive when it comes to building these relationships. And if you're not proactive at all, you will be left out of the conversation. And that's really bad from a career standpoint. And it's certainly bad from a promotion standpoint. Yeah. Okay, so how did you navigate these job roles you've had, and was it intentional or accidental? I have to say, when I was in high school, I designed a bit of a 20-year plan for my career, and I charted it. So the best way to answer this is that it was strategic over the long term and opportunistic in the short term. So my goal is to use blockchain technology and fintech technology to increase financial inclusion in the world on as massive a scale as possible during my career life. And what that meant 10 years ago is that I was going to be involved in the private equity industry, in the investment industry, investment management industry, which I was. And I was a quant there, using numbers to forecast political risk for investing in Africa, and how we can essentially de-risk investments into Africa by having these models built into the investment decision of investors. It's how I got started looking at this, right? So if you have a mission, a goal that really drives you, it doesn't matter what the job market looks like, there'll always be a position that helps you get further and closer to having as big an impact as possible, right? Also, a metric that I kept track of is remuneration, how much it pays, right? Because I have a target for how much I should be paid for the skills that I'm building. So I've also kept that as a metric that oriented me and reoriented me through the years in terms of how to navigate my career to make sure I have the right progression. So I had to be very opportunistic in the short term, but I also had to be very strategic in the long term, and I continue to be. And that will probably inform what I do next after this current position, or what I look to achieve from the current position or set of positions that I have. I hope that that answers that question. Any other questions? I'm just reading the comments here. Oh my God. Okay. So ICOs, again, this is not an investment conversation. So I will just explain what ICOs are. In the history of commerce, companies have sought to raise money from other people, strangers, through the use of shares. And the only ways to have shares turn into a lot of money for the history of finance so far was through something called IPOs on stock exchanges, right? You've heard about the Airbnb IPO, the Uber IPO, big events where your pension fund money goes into, these stocks for these up and coming technology companies that get listed. Now, Satoshi Nakamoto's blockchain algorithm allowed people to essentially use the Bitcoin blockchain as public proof of how they use their finances and public fundraising mechanisms that cost nothing. So if you want to have an IPO on the London Stock Exchange today, you need about $5 to $7 million initially, and about $700,000 to $3 million a year in legal and compliance fees to stay listed on the London Stock Exchange to raise money for your startup. On blockchain, people doing ICOs, you could have any project, and as long as your project is real, that you have a product you're looking to deliver, a software product, a literal product, you can have an ICO where you get a token, you build a token on the blockchain, and people who have cryptocurrencies, given some marketing that you do, can essentially transfer their currencies to your ICO initial coin offering. And that will essentially have an impact where you get funding. In exchange, you give part of your token. And the more people buy your token, the price of your token will rise. Just like the more people buy Uber shares, the more the price of Uber on the stock exchange rises. So ICO is a different fundraising mechanism that's a lot more inclusive, cheaper to hold, and a lot faster, right? Many companies in the blockchain space raised $180 million. There's a project called Definity, and they famously raised $186 million in 15 minutes about 4 years ago. Many projects in the blockchain space raised this much money. In fact, CUDOS ourselves, our token right now, we raised that through an ICO over the past few months. And I'm not promoting it at all, but I'm just mentioning that it's a new way of financing your business idea using the blockchain-based financial system. I hope that answers it. Okay, so I'm reading Oluseun's comment. Exactly, that's absolutely correct. There are many ways to connect informally, and you don't have to wait for meetings happening in your company in order to interact with your colleagues. You really need to be proactive. I think the key to being a minority in these fairly white-dominated spaces is being proactive, not being passive. Because if you're passive, you're done. It's game over. There's nothing very good that can happen for you being passive in your industry for 5 years. At best, you'll keep your job. But if you're a conscious navigator in your career, if you understand that there's a cultural ecosystem around you that you can almost take advantage of because you understand it now, this world gets a lot more fun, actually. Because people get, I have to say, it's very uncomfortable to say, but people who don't look like me get very comfortable once they deal with a professional who's aware that there are barriers to people who are not Black to understand what the challenges are. But also don't blame everyone who's not Black for their struggles, but also actively look to leverage the cultural context for their own career objective versus seeing themselves necessarily as a Black professional on Monday, a Black professional on Tuesday, a Black professional on Thursday. You have a job to do. You have obstacles because of stereotypes that you overcome. But at the end of the day, you have to thrive, essentially. and you have the same deck as everyone else, as soon as you understand that you need to self-care, equip yourself with resources, and find allies in your workplace. Okay. Linear, you mentioned quite a linear approach entering into the blockchain space. What do you recommend for those with alternative routes into training? Can they still navigate into the blockchain space? Absolutely. So if you're not, I guess like me, because I'm a nerd, right? I'm a complete nerd. My nickname in school was unfortunately Carlton. I don't know if it was inclusive or not, but fine. Not everyone's like that. Not everyone, realizes that computers speak to them very early, but they do. People do realize after that in university, maybe after that right YouTube video. So what do you do in that case? Go to udemy.com. I'm going to type it in the chat window here, udemy.com. And for as little as £19 and maybe 20 hours of your time, you can teach yourself many of the key skills required to join the tech industry today and earn 5 to 6 figures very easily. You need the discipline, right? You need the discipline for sure to thrive, because it's a very competitive world where you may have done that on Udemy, but anyone in the world with a computer is doing the same. This is the world we live in now. And I think one point that I'll mention, and I hope it's not too controversial with maybe the older member of the audience, but my parents, for example, I spent about 7 years convincing them that being involved in technology was not a horrible career decision. Instead of becoming a lawyer, an engineer, a banker, our families in minorities, in ethnic minority families, we have this conception of the 1980s where you need to have several letters next to your name to have a stable financial life. That is not the case anymore. In fact, I have more MBA students who spent £500,000 in their education, taking the same Udemy courses that you'll be taking after this talk today to get the exact same job. So I've had a 7-year struggle with any older member of my family, both in Africa and in Canada, which is where I'm from, to let them encourage your children to get involved in technology, understand what it is, understand that it's not a traditional path in our community necessarily, but it's a very viable one that is equally lucrative, if not more, than many established professions like banking, but also is very, very, very inclusive if you do what I just mentioned to you, if you navigate things the way I've just explained to you. I was absolutely in love with the technology space because code doesn't discriminate. The internet doesn't discriminate, right? If you deploy a piece of code, it doesn't matter if you are Chinese, Asian, alien, from Neptune, it will run, it will compile, and if it's attractive, it will grow market share. You may not have friends in Silicon Valley, your parents may not have been the lawyers of the founders of Uber, but that's not what's required in the world anymore. We don't live in that ecosystem anymore. And this is a great opportunity for our community. And what I would love most after this conversation today is to see more people who understood about what blockchain can do, what AI can do, and reach out to me in terms of how they can get started, how to get started tomorrow. And I'm going to answer again the same question from a different standpoint. What can I do now if I wasn't a nerd in university or something like that? I would find what expertise you have. Is it customer service? Is it compliance and legal? Is it in risk management? Is it in branding and advertising? Is it in community relations? You can put that expertise you've built while technology was becoming big and bring that expertise onto any startup in your community today or on the internet that you can click with today. So you don't have to learn how to code to be involved in technology. You can leverage the expertise and skill set that you've acquired so far to push a technology company forward. Because to tell the truth, they lack a lot of that non-technical savvy most of the time. Okay, I'm going to answer the next question. How do you find investors from venture firms in the crypto space? Okay, that's a very tricky question, right? Because many of the venture capital firms in the crypto space are literally behind the $1 trillion of cryptocurrencies that we have now, right? So what I would say is that go onto the ICO website of any crypto project and look at their Our Partners section. It usually lists the logos of the venture capital firms that they tap funding from on a private basis. So generally speaking, look at who backs existing projects as firms and reach out to these firms instead. Initially. LinkedIn is also very useful when it comes to identifying these major companies. So I think use LinkedIn, Go to the website of any of these major blockchain projects, and they will usually list them as one of their key partners. Okay, so next question. So there's Nena's comment. I want to leverage my transactional finance skills in tech, applying AI on our mission. Woo! That is a beautiful field to be involved in, transactional finance. Okay, so what you need to look at, I think you'll be aware that HSBC, today in Finextra, R3 Corda, which is a blockchain platform that I've been working on until recently, they were used by HSBC to issue either syndicated loans or trade finance transactions using blockchain technology. So you don't have to understand blockchain specifically, but you can apply AI as a technology or robotic process automation on top of blockchain-based systems. So look at how transactional finance applies to blockchain and how you can connect AI to make these blockchains smart. That's one way. Or forget blockchain. If there are any databases that apply to transactional finance, any analysis required that you currently do, you will very likely be able to write a neural network or write some kind of advanced Markov logic engine, which is what they're called, complex decision makers, Markov logic engines. So these usually help make sophisticated professional grade decisions using code, so automated without any human being, on banking transactions in real time. So if you want to do that, Nena, I think I recommend that you learn what data science is, right? Go on YouTube, look at data science lectures. You can get up to 10 hours of data science lectures for free, and that will give you a sense for how you can go about batching transactional finance flows into databases, and then using complex AI to analyze these transactions to do the one thing that you know about, or the three things you can do with your eyes closed that someone somewhere should be doing, or that maybe you would outsource today. Because one thing that you should know is that if you're in finance today and your job is outsourceable in any way, the same thing for law, your job is probably on the way out. So you need to learn how to automate your own job function in order to stay relevant in the next 10 years or so. So Nena, feel free to reach out on LinkedIn, and I'll be more than happy to send you more resources on how to get started with that. Okay, so Marcus has write a white paper for an SEO. So I don't quite do that. I can obviously have a chat about how this is best done. I think the internet has a lot of resources on how to do this well. But I'd be more than happy to advise, but I can't write white papers for any particular projects because obviously I have my own that I'm currently pioneering, and I advise on a few others as well. But I think a lot of that needs to come from you and what your vision for your company is, and any way I can assist with that, just let me know. Okay, perfect. Yeah, that sounds good, Nena. Yeah, so banking is a bit of a tricky industry when it comes to this, because if you remember 10, 15 years ago, being an investment banker was very prestigious, you know? And today you're finding that many investment banking desks are getting closed flat out. It's 10 times harder to get into investment banking today than it was 10 years ago because there are that much fewer positions available. Why? Because companies' trading desks are becoming run by artificial intelligence, running using blockchain. Digital assets are overtaking actual current assets in terms of traditional financial assets in terms of trading. So if you're looking to join the finance industry today, or if you're looking to stay in it for decades at a time, technology needs to be a feather in your cap, just in case. You may not learn to code yourself, although I'm surprised if that's the case, because you still need to handle Excel from a fairly automated way going forward. But you don't need to code yourself. You need to be aware of technology's impact on your career, especially as a Black professional, because it has to be said, when they decide on who should go first, unless you've done the networking informally, unless you've understood the company culture, it's usually, unfortunately, minority professionals who get shown the door very quickly first from what I've seen, right? It may not be an industry fact, but that's the truth also. Okay, next question from Ozone. How would you advise a 12-year-old girl looking to move into tech AI? She's already learning Python now, likes music, DT, but ultimately wants to go into fashion design. Okay, so 12 years old is obviously a bit of a young age to make any career decisions. So as I mentioned to you, exposing them to the technology, making them familiar with it is very important. So if she's already into tech and AI and already knows Python, that's very cool. I would find a way for her to use Python in AI. Python, by the way, is the language of AI. So Nena, Python is the language that you'll need to learn in order to do this automation that I talked about. So find some nonprofit causes that you can get involved with, or find some gamified ways of using music, Python technology to maybe deploy music or analyze music related data. Anything you turn into a game will have kids essentially spend so much more, doing or spending their time doing than if you force them or told them that's part of the curriculum or anything like that. For me, for example, I learned to code mainly because I was trying to get free video games from free trials when I was a kid. When I was 12, I was trying to get free video games and had to learn C++ in order to get free. Let's just say I was getting free games as a result of learning C++ and going into the internals of how video games work. And that essentially gave me that background skill that enabled me 10 years later in university to pick up the basics of artificial intelligence on a self-taught basis and, get started and having a great time in the industry over the past 7 to almost 10 years. Yes, so Mimo is a great child-friendly app. There is something called Solo Learn. I'm going to post it in the chat window here. And that's one that's also very good for any professional of any age. So this is a gamified way of learning to code any computing language. So if you get downloaded on Android or iOS now, you can learn any language, the basics of it, so that at least you'll be able to learn how to read code and then understand what code means for your particular job function, your charity function, or in the case of the young girl Oluseun, her hobbies, right? So this is very interesting, and I'm happy to see that she's taking such an early interest. All right. So yeah, LinkedIn Learn is very useful, but I have to say I'm not very impressed with LinkedIn Learn and what they offer. You can finish LinkedIn Learn series and not be able to write a single line of Python that worth talking about. At least that's been my experience when I was getting started. I would highly recommend you look into Solo Learn and YouTube. Go to YouTube. The knowledge of the entire world, from how to build a rocket, how to launch a nano satellite, how to get into blockchain, how to code basic Python AIs, all of it is on YouTube now for free. You don't need to pay anything, just invest the time to get started. Okay, which is the best blockchain out there now to develop smart contracts on? Okay, so that depends on your industry choice. So in financial services and enterprise, R3's Corda is the very best in the world today. Many of the world's central bank currencies being announced are essentially running on R3's Corda blockchain. So that's been a lot of my personal work over the past 2 years in Europe, and that's been really, really interesting. So Corda for enterprise. For anything that's not enterprise and that's maybe retail facing, I would recommend Ethereum, because Ethereum is easy. It's so easy to build an application, like a mobile app that interfaces with Ethereum blockchain. And there are many games. It's very user-friendly. Enterprise blockchains are not very user-friendly right now. So I would say if you're building for business in a regulated context, Corda. If you're using or if you're building for a retail audience, then I recommend you use Ethereum or any of the layer 2 blockchains like Cosmos or any of the DeFi applications themselves. Okay, so I think we're right on time here. If you don't have any more questions, you know how to reach me. I'm Yves Messi on LinkedIn, so you can reach out anytime. I'd be more than happy to assist. I'd love to see more Black professionals in this space. And as I mentioned, you need to make sure that you reach out to industry professionals who are minorities in the space that can pull you up. We really pull each other up in this space. And the more of us there are, the less abnormal it look when we appear in positions of leadership. Marcus, I can't give recommendations to EOCO. I've been exposed to the software and the team. We can discuss that maybe on a private channel if that works for you. So feel free to reach out later. All right, thank you. Have an excellent time. Thanks for sticking around. I know it's a bit quite late. I hope I give you a number of tools at the end of the day for you to start tomorrow morning to be included in the blockchain space and how to navigate the blockchain space and the fintech space to maybe rise to positions that help you have an impact in your industry of choice.